There is an amazing view, if you turn and look back right now, of the colors, the colorful windows on the sides. We're all so fortunate to have this holy and beautiful space to get together. Those of you in the back, please come forward and join us. Can they hear? Can they hear back there? I must say, never in my wildest dreams did I picture myself doing this. Standing in a cathedral and speaking was not something a little girl on a tobacco farm in Cana, Virginia, thought was possible. But that is the beauty of this cathedral and its community, that we have things in common. We love the same things. And that is what binds us together. Despite all of our other differences of background or education or experience, we are a community, and that is what we want to celebrate and recognize. Especially in times of COVID, when we felt very isolated at moments. All of you have. We've lost loved ones, or we've suffered from isolation. And the feeling of community was part of what inspired Olmsted, I think. We'll hear more about that later, but the importance of public spaces and sharing. So come forward, spread yourselves out as you're comfortable with our COVID restrictions. I should have introduced myself. You say, who is that lady with a southern accent speaking? I'm Sarah Brow. I'm president of All Hallows Guild. I come originally from Mount Airy, North Carolina, which is Mayberry. Andy Griffith came from my hometown. If you ever watched the Andy Griffith show, I knew him somewhat. So anything is possible in this world, as we find out. All right, I think we have everyone here, pretty much. We wanted first and foremost to welcome all members of the Guild who have been so faithful over these years, some of you longer than others. The new members believe in us and believe they can make valuable contributions, and we believe in them as well. But those of you who have been here longer know this is a wonderful community, and we're proud to have you as part of it. We have, as I said, some guests from the horticulture staff and engineering staff here at the cathedral. I wonder, would you like to stand up and let us express our appreciation? If you would, please stand. You are blessed with a wonderful job of keeping flower power going. And Sandy Flowers is our trusted leader of this whole effort. Thank you, Sandy, and to you, gentlemen, for all you do. And we'd like to talk with you more on other times when we get a chance. I thought Andy Soberg was going to maybe get here. Yes, Andy is here, our security help. Andy is the quiet presence that makes us all feel safe, and we do appreciate it, Andy. We rarely get a chance to tell you, but I'm glad today we do have that chance. Hilda, our friend Hilda has been here helping us set up. I think she'll be back in a minute. We'll let someone else do the thanks to her. All right, we have volunteers recognition. We have a very important day today. I'm going to let Young A. Kim and Susan Crudgington do that in just a minute. But I'm about to turn this now over to our Dean Randy, who will give our opening prayer. Thank you, Randy.
Good morning, everyone. Before I kick us off with a prayer, I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to All Hallows Guild. You know, I live up here in Sayre House, and during the height of the pandemic, when everything was shut down, when this cathedral was closed, and when all we were doing was digital, and there was very little taking place inside the building, I hope most of you got to see how important the grounds of this cathedral became. Literally, the 58 acres up here became the sacred space. Not that it's not always part of the sacred space, but it really became the sacred space during those 15 months of pandemic when this beautiful building was closed for worship. And the hundreds and hundreds of people that I saw every day, half of them in my backyard sometimes, but that I saw every day who were here on the close, trying to find a spot in the grass to sit down, or taking a long walk, or just catching their breath, emerging from their homes, so many of us anxious and worried about the virus or a member of our family, and this place became such holy ground for everyone. And that's because of the work of All Hallows Guild and our wonderful horticulture department. And I just want you all to know how important this space is to the wider community. I know you know that, but it became especially important during this pandemic. And thank you. Thank you for all that you all do, this group that has been together and around for so long. Thank you for all that you do year after year, generation after generation, to care for the outdoor spaces of this close and to make sure that we have a beautiful cathedral outdoors as well as indoors. So thank you. Now, if you'll indulge me, we'll have a prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty and gracious God, we give you thanks for the beauty of your creation and for the opportunity we have to dwell in it. I thank you this day for All Hallows Guild and for the work that they have done and the work they continue to do to bless us by caring for your creation on this close. I pray that you will guide them in their meeting today, that you will grant them vision for the future, that you will help them to see how grateful all of us are for all that they have done, and that you will give them the gift of your Holy Spirit, so that in all that they do and all that they plan, they might praise your holy name. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Susan Crudgington.
And my name is Young-ae Kim.
And together we are the board members who are in charge of the Tea and Tour program. We're novices compared to the powerhouses who started this program, Betty Gordon and Kay Brown, and the Wonder Women, Patty Beatty and Kay Diane Bowles, who ran this program for decades. But we are here today because our tea program has been on hiatus since March of 2020. And we miss our volunteers. All of you who are at home, we see you. And you volunteers are the heart of this tea program. So today we want to salute you, because without you, not one cup of tea, not one table would have been set, not one teapot lifted without your enormous effort. So will all of you who have ever hoisted a teapot as a tea and tour volunteer please stand up? At home, please stand up also. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Together you represent thousands and thousands of woman hours and decades of service, bringing people to this beautiful cathedral and welcoming them to our wonderful tea program. We also would like to thank Hilda, who is here somewhere. We saw her earlier. We know how much hard work Hilda put into our program. Without her, we would have been flat on the floor. She did our washing up, and when Hilda wasn't able to come, it was very clear how hard she worked. And now we'd like to ask Melissa Isbister to come up. For those of you who don't know Melissa, she ran the Tea and Tour program from the cathedral's side. She took every reservation. She spoke to every, come on. She spoke to every guest. She is the one who made our tea program #1 in the Washington area. So,
No crying,
So-
no crying.
Melissa retired quietly last year. Not many people know that, and so we want to make a fuss over you. And because without Melissa, this tea program would have ground to a halt. Actually, we would have been just completely bereft. We want to crown you Queen of the Tea program.
That's beautiful. Look at that.
So whenever your subjects are not behaving the way you think they should, you just put that on.
Thank you. I don't know what to say.
Because who cannot live without more tea towels?
Oh, that's
This
gorgeous.
is one to remember the cherry blossom teas that you and Dan decorated for our program that really were the most memorable events for so many people. And this is to remind you that our guests came from all 50 states.
All 50 states.
Yes, indeed. And then is a little something so that you and Dan can celebrate together.
Oh my gosh.
Dan, her husband, actually put in so many hours to make our program. I mean, he is the unsung hero, so you let him know we think.
I will. Oh my God.
Because flowers are a part of our tea program, and
Yes.
you know, those are
Yes.
for you.
Oh my gosh.
And then, because we're not done yet,
I feel like
this
Miss
is from
America.
this is from the Guild. This is from the Guild in
my
thanks
God.
for all that you did for us. Melissa, you really were an amazing powerhouse, Wonder Woman, Queen
I
of
hold it for
Tea.
you.
So can we give her a round of applause? Yay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good Lord.
Good morning. My kudos also to Melissa, who is without peer. My name is Carol Kelleher. I'm the chair of the Garden Committee in All Hallows Guild. And if you picked up your annual report at the front, I suggest you do. But on the back, there's a listing of the projects that we participated in over this fiscal year, I guess you would say. First is Church House, where due to installation of gas lines. There was a serious trench dug in the front, which dug up the grounds, and gave us a chance to redo the entire front garden of Church House. The National Cathedral School Curran Courtyard, which is a new garden, it's beautiful. After the renovations of the buildings over there, the courtyard was left looking like an equipment yard, I should say. It looks beautiful now, blooms in school colors of purple and gold, wrought iron tutors and a rose arbor. If you have been in the woods lately, or even down Pilgrim Road, you might notice that the Woodland Bridge was taken down. It was March this year. The bridge had been closed since 2012, when an unfortunate storm sent tree limbs down on it, so it had been closed and condemned and hadn't been safe for a while before that, apparently. So that is taken down, and we're pleased that that is no longer a hazard, which it certainly was. As Dean Randy mentioned, how many people have come into the gardens during the pandemic, and the Shadow House, which is sort of our iconic symbol, is very heavily visited. It brought us to notice how the wood fittings in there need work, and so we're working with some specialty woodworkers, hoping to get that repaired. We did, as always, sponsor 3 horticulture interns for the summer who are college students in horticulture or environmental studies, and they come and help during the heavy, hot weeding time, but they also learn a lot to take back to their programs. Not least, but last on this particular list, and dear to Mrs. Petri's heart, are the Olmsted Woods, which we are seriously working on now to augment the water mitigation measures that were put in 20 years ago, Dede, and which we're working with actually the same landscape architecture firm, because increasing hardscape on the close causes runoff, and that's to the south, and it's downhill, and working on that. Another item that is on the table back there that we've actually put together for the Garden Day in September, which we canceled, but if you should, through some fluke, be tired of the Bishop's Garden, this is a little self-guided cathedral garden tour. You can walk through it. There's a map, and you should notice on the bottom of this, there's a QR code. There are QR codes on many of the spots within the gardens. And if you just feel like staying home because it's a cold, rainy day, you can pull up our website where there is a self-guided tour with photos and music and narration. So there's no reason you can't find out everything you need to know here. Since Sarah already asked the horticulture staff to stand, I will not do that, so remain at ease, but I will read your names because you're very important to us. We have 16 employees who take care of all over the close, the schools, the cathedral grounds, the woods. Sandy Flowers, Director of Horticulture and Grounds, Evan Johnson, Assistant Director of Horticulture and Grounds, Nick Ritz, the Irrigation Specialist, Addie Schoaf, Gardener of the Bishop's Garden, Peter Spalding, Zone Gardener for the Cathedral, Gilberto Castro for NCS, Luis Hernandez for Beauvoir, Dan Wright for St. Albans, Nassim Benquera, who's a flex gardener, which means he goes wherever he's needed. Megan Grogan, also a flex gardener, and new to the close, welcome Megan. Macon Moyer of the Turf Crew, Mike McGinnis, Turf Crew, Ryan Weaver on the Turf Crew, and also new to the close, welcome Ryan. Alvaro Gomez, Turf Crew, Nelson Flores, groundskeeper of the St. Albans Athletic Fields, and Carlos Perea, mechanic, and also major domo of the carousel. So we've become buddies over the years. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nicole, and I'm the Assistant Treasurer for the All Hallows Guild. I, too, am very delighted to see so many of you in person this morning, and I'm also very grateful for the technology that allows us to have so many others join us virtually. Our treasurer, Ann Andrews, is herself unable to attend the meeting this morning, so I will do my best to share the report that she has prepared for us all. Now, in fiscal year 2021, which began on July 1st, 2020, and ended on June 30th, 2021, the All Hallows Guild, like everyone else, continued to experience the impacts of COVID-19. For the second year in a row, the Guild was forced to cancel Flower Mart, our biggest fundraiser, and to continue the suspension of Tea and Tour program that was so dear to all of us, which was another significant revenue source. These resulted in the loss of more than $130,000 in expected revenue, a substantial downfall for the fiscal year. However, members and supporters are very generous, and we received more than double the anticipated income from contributions. At the end, our income totaled $86,289, while our operating budget exceeded $240,000, $241,714 to be exact. Now, regardless of any shortfall, the gardens and grounds of the National Cathedral remained open, and we continue to pay for flowers, bulbs, shrubs, tree maintenance, storm damage remediation, landscape architects, arborists, garden interns, which we had 3, staff education, and stonework. There's quite few. And just as we have done so in the past 104-year history, All Hallows Guild allocated its resources to remove Woodlands Bridge that was not only unsightly, but a major safety hazard, as Carol reported, as well as many others that are mentioned in the back of the program. Also, in direct response to COVID, we incurred several expenses to bring All Hallows Guild board meeting and the executive committee meeting online, and to create an online garden tour and podcasts, and to hold the 2021 annual meeting virtually. In addition, we have invested about $5,000 in one-time expense to reduce our operating costs by consolidating our space to a smaller office in the Cathedral Library and moving to a more cost-effective database. It is expected that these changes will realize savings of about $12,000 a year. Overall, we are very happy to report that our financial position remains strong, and we ended the fiscal year with approximately $500,000 in available funds and $2.1 million in investments that have held their value. These resources, along with continuing membership and contributions, will allow us to continue to fund our core gardens and programs, grounds mission through 2022. Thank you all for your continued support. Thank you to everybody who's joining us from home. And I was very nervous.
I saw a headline in the New York Times that said, "Women are good at investments." You heard the statement. We are doing financially quite well despite the difficulties of losing revenue. And this is in large part due to the very good, talented people who are volunteering to oversee all of our financial situation. So we are indeed in gratitude to you for exercising such wonderful judgment on these matters. Thank you, and it matters to the gardens and grounds very much. I did want to mention we received word that our friend Peggy Pickard, who was a longtime Guild member and had inspired us all in many ways, had just recently passed away, and there is some information about that. We also lost Ruth Anna Weber this year, one of our inspirational forces behind the Guild. There may be others. Some of you have lost beloved family members and are trying to maintain your role in the Guild and balance that with your tremendous loss in life. And we do share your feelings and want to support you in any way we can. Is there anyone else that you'd like to mention today that has passed on this year? All right, thank you. And I know we say a prayer for these loved ones. I have a little bit to say as the president. I wanted to say that I find the board and the executive committee of the Guild a phenomenal group of people. We meet virtually. We have met virtually twice a month, either executive committee and the board once a month, most of the year. And it is through these meetings that a lot of the decisions are made that keep our Guild and grounds functioning. And without these meetings and these people devoting their time and their energy, and many of you are here today or watching, the Guild would not be the Guild. So I only stand here as a representative of that larger group, and thank you all. I'll talk about flower power. I'm a child of the 60s. Power was a word we all respected. I think we've heard the power of the gardens and the grounds to soothe and create beauty in a way that has made a tremendous impact on our community. What is new to report in fiscal year 2021? How has the unique experience of the COVID pandemic affected us and our mission? In many ways, this past year's difficult seasons have brought out our better, more generous nature. This leads us to people power. We have gathered funds to keep the gardens and grounds open throughout, and you heard the report of how generous people have been with their donations in a touching way. We have been opened the grounds and kept the grounds open free to all. Free to all. Such an important concept. Seeking a haven of peace and refreshment. We have organized, reorganized, and even had to cancel plans for events such as Flower Mart 2020. The amount of work that goes into organizing an event such as Flower Mart and then to see it canceled must be disheartening in a way, but realize that those of you who spent so much time doing that, we do greatly appreciate your faith and your belief that Flower Mart will eventually come back and how important it is to keep planning for it. Garden Day 2021, Debbie Page did a wonderful job organizing this, but because it was centered around children and children's activities and the fact that children had not been immunized, we felt it was safer for the children if we canceled the Garden Day. So this was our thinking, and we did have to cancel it. Again, I know the amount of effort went into that. We hope to resume that, but it was out of an abundance of caution. Tea and tour sounds like, oh, ladies sitting down and having tea, so what? No. This was the wider world coming to visit the cathedral and taking the tour of the gardens and the cathedral, and then sitting down and having a community in the tower and seeing the beautiful views and feeling the camaraderie of the volunteers who served the tea. That was what was valuable about tea and tour, and that's what we miss. We haven't had it. Cathedral staff dedicated volunteers and guild members have volunteered countless hours to keeping our mission alive and thriving, even amongst their personal stresses and challenges. There's none of us who's come through this COVID time without some personal strain in our lives that we don't even speak about sometimes, but know that we are trying to be aware that if you can't volunteer as much as you used to because your mother is sick in a nursing home, we understand and we support you. That's not what we're about, demanding your time. We're about supporting one another. We have inspired, by maintaining the gardens and grounds, people of all ages to visit in person or online. Carol has done a wonderful design of the garden, a virtual tour. We've had people ranging in ages from babies, toddlers staring at the Pan statue, to folks who can barely walk through the gardens but want to come and see it and derive the inspiration there, benefiting from the guardrails that were installed by Carol and some others in an earlier time. People of all ages need our gardens, and that is another group we're here for. On a more practical matter, we did downsize and move our office space, and partially to improve access for all, moving it to a ground floor level office rather than having to climb stairs. We felt that would open up the office for more easy visiting by guild members or fellow volunteers. So that was one main reason we did that. Another was it did save us quite a bit of money. One bit of news, we started a program of grant applications and a new philanthropy committee to do that, partially to help replace the funds that were lost due to the cancellation of our main fundraising events. This philanthropy committee under Tammy Manning has had very strong success reaching out to foundations who have expressed a great deal of interest and have contributed in the form of grants to the Guild for use on the gardens and grounds. This is a new effort. It is working. It is spreading the philosophy of the Guild, and the foundations respect that. We're getting very good feedback saying, yes, this is a valuable effort, and we want to contribute funds to support it. So this has been an effort that I think has been very successful and will continue to be. The Cathedral and PECF entities have been valued partners. We are a subset of the PECF. We feel very much involved with them and they with us in supporting our efforts and wanting to know more about them, and we're trying to increase our communication with one another. We recognize how important keeping our communication flow going is. We continue to support the landscape design projects at the closed schools. The closed schools are important to us and the children there. We want to continue to develop projects and plans with the schools, and their representatives of the schools have been here today and are so eager to talk with us. We recognize as we pass through the entrance gates to the gardens that we are seeing in the garden before us the external form of our internal garden, the garden that's inside of each of us. There's a reason we feel so comfortable and find solace in our gardens. We are coming home to our best selves, our best spirit when we enter the gardens. And that has uplifted us all. I thank you very much. We will move on now to Lydia Benson, who will introduce our speaker for the morning.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here at our annual meeting today. I hope that everyone is comfortable because you are about to be wowed by our guest speaker. Before I introduce her to you, before she comes up, I'd like to tell you a little bit about her because she is an incredible person. Anne Dede Neal Petri first became part of the National Association for Olmsted Parks family as a member of its Board of Trustees. As of the beginning of 2020, she assumed a new role as NAOP's first president and CEO. And while over the last 30 years, she has been a leader and an innovator in a wide range of nonprofit organizations, Dede Petri is no stranger to All Hallows Guild or the Cathedral Close. She has served as chair or co-chair of the Guild's Garden Committee, and then as the Guild's president from 2004 to 2006. She launched and served as chair of the Olmsted Woods restoration, a decade-long, $3 million project that revitalized the 5-acre woodland on the Cathedral Close. She's a past president of the Garden Club of America, and in 1995, she co-founded the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, a nonprofit dedicated to higher education, and served as its president from 2003 to 2016. She's also served as general counsel and congressional liaison for the National Endowment for the Humanities and worked as a First Amendment and communication lawyer. In addition to All Hallows Guild, she has served on the board of many cultural and civic organizations, including, just a few, Friends of the National Arboretum, the U.S. Capitol Historical Society, Casey Trees, and the Payne Art Center and Gardens. She's also authored or co-authored numerous studies, but including Restoring the Olmsted Woods and Washington National Cathedral Gardens, a guide for families. We're honored and proud to have her as our speaker at today's annual meeting. Please join me in welcoming Dede Petri.
Well, it is terrific to be here. I must say, after many years of different experiences and different positions, there is no group that compares to All Hallows Guild. You are just an exceptional group of ladies, and it is so wonderful to look out and see so many friends. And I want to do a special shout out to Anne Ellsbury, who was so essential to the Olmsted Woods restoration. It is great to see her today. Let it not be for present delight, nor for present use alone. Let it be such work as our descendants will thank us for. And let us think that a time is to come when men will say, "See, this our fathers did for us." Those are the words of Frederick Law Olmsted, and they seem wonderfully apropos as we gather here today to mark All Saints' Day and to celebrate the work of All Hallows Guild. Olmsted understood, as the Guild understands, that landscape design and stewardship are like faith. They require contemplation, hope, and deliberation. They require a profound understanding that some things are simply beyond present delight and that our work is for the long term. Beauty and stability in the landscape come from attention, care, and patience. When people go to Central Park or Prospect Park, they often assume that the parks have been there forever. There is little awareness that these parks and landscapes were, in fact, made by human hand. These landscapes are part of the built environment, and they demand a commitment to stewardship from all of us. So let me say again, thank you, All Hallows Guild and the horticultural staff here at the Cathedral. It's hard to believe that just 25 years ago, there was no so-called Olmsted Woods at the Washington National Cathedral. Instead, there was a seriously degraded woodland, compacted soil, invasives, and dying trees. There was the threat of an ice skating rink in a heritage forest. In a 1996 report, consultant biohabitats concluded that the cathedral woodlands are in danger of extinction if action is not taken soon. Thanks to the ladies in this room, the All Hallows Guild undertook a cutting-edge woodlands restoration project, one that, yes, continues to require attention and resources to conserve and restore this historic landscape, and literally to put the Olmsteads on the map when it comes to their contributions here at Mount St. Alban. Although the Olmsted firm undertook nearly 6,000 projects around the country, literally designing the American landscape, this landscape legacy is underappreciated. One biographer has said, Olmsted may well be the most important American historical figure that the average person knows least about. So this morning, it's my pleasure to examine the contributions, both in terms of work and values, of Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. and Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., as we prepare for the bicentennial in 2022 of Frederick Law Olmsted Sr.'s birth. The U.S. Capitol grounds and the Washington National Cathedral are both Olmsted landscapes, and we here in the nation's capital are the direct beneficiary of the visionary work of father and son. All of you today are key players in the ongoing protection and preservation of this remarkable landscape legacy. So let's start with Olmsted Senior. To use a great horticultural term, Olmsted was a late bloomer. It was not until he was 43 that he at last decided to take up the profession of landscape architecture. For more than 20 years, he, in the words of Olmsted expert Charles Beveridge, gathered experiences. He never graduated from college, but variously worked as a surveyor, a merchant, a common seaman on a boat traveling to China, as well as a scientific farmer in Connecticut and Staten Island. Olmsted was also a writer. He penned his first book, Walks and Talks of an American Farmer in England, in 1852, after returning from a glorious walking tour of England and parts of Europe. It is there that he saw Birkenhead Park, a rare public park in Liverpool, open to all people in what was surely an aha moment that influenced his later work. He also served as an editor of Putnam's magazine, finding his place among the literary lights of the 19th century, including Irving, Emerson, Longfellow, and Stowe. One of the most formative experiences for him was serving as a roving undercover reporter for what was then a startup known as the New York Times. Over a period of 2 years, Olmsted traveled from Virginia all the way to West Texas, posting reports on the state of the Southern economy and slavery. At that time, the North and England had very little understanding of either, and from these posts, Olmsted wrote 4 books. The last one, Cotton Kingdom, issued in 1861, just as the Civil War was breaking out. The possession of arbitrary power has always, the world over, he wrote, tended irresistibly to destroy humane sensibility, magnanimity, and truth. Professor John Stauffer has called Olmsted accounts of the pre-Civil War South the best other than slave narratives. And today, Olmsted's account is credited with helping to persuade England to remain neutral in the Civil War. Biographer Justin Martin says Olmsted's middle name should have been Serendipity. Indeed, throughout his life, Olmsted kept falling into new jobs and new responsibilities that would eventually help bring him to his career as a landscape architect. Olmsted had no experience administering a park, but he did know some individuals in high places. And you guessed it, a recommendation from Washington Irving helped clinch the deal to what became the job of first administrator of Central Park. In less than a year, he and his partner Calvert Vaux entered a design competition for Central Park, and the rest, as they say, is history. The Vaux-Olmsted submission, known as the Greensward Plan, was inspired. It included before and after views, something that we now take for granted in landscape design, that allowed the park commissioners to envision what the park would look like. But Frederick Law Olmsted never stays anywhere for long, at least at this phase of his life. Annoyed by bureaucratic infighting and with a desire to assist the Union cause, Olmsted left his post at Central Park in 1861 to serve as executive secretary of the U.S. Sanitary Commission, a forerunner of the Red Cross. He lobbied Congress for funds to build modern hospitals, organized an efficient system for distributing supplies, outfitted ships as floating hospitals, and even promoted fresh vegetables for soldiers' rations. Tired yet again by bureaucratic infighting, a complaint that you find frequently in Olmsted's writings, Olmsted left D.C. and went west, this time to manage the Mariposa gold mine. Olmsted arrives in California to run the mine just in time to be appointed by the governor of California to head a commission concerning the Yosemite Valley and Mariposa Big Tree Grove. The feds have just made a grant of property to California for a public park, and Olmsted is asked to draw up a comprehensive report and to make recommendations. So it is, he wrote in 1865, a groundbreaking report that envisioned the preservation of America's great scenic features for the enjoyment of all Americans. This report, in so many ways, gave birth to the idea of a national park system, although we do not generally associate Olmsted with the park system. And it was his son, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., who later played a critical role in creating the national park system. We'll come back to Rick later. It's important for us to remember, Olmsted lived in the 19th century in the midst of massive urbanization, growing populations, and a public health crisis. Open sewers, pollution, pandemics, sound familiar? The Civil War was underway, and the country was deeply divided. Landscape architect and Harvard professor Sarah Zodi argues that Olmsted did not just drop into landscape architecture. His focus on designing the American landscape was in fact a response, she says, to seeing slavery. It was his effort to shape the landscape in a way that would bring people together after the brutalization of slavery and the Civil War. As Laura Wood Roper opines, park making was premised for Olmsted on a social plan. Olmsted was truly the first to see the intersection of thoughtful design and civic, ecological, and health benefits. He had a concept called communitiveness. It required a person to serve others and to be served by others in the most intimate, complete, and extended degree imaginable. To Olmsted, parks and open spaces were essential because they allowed beleaguered city dwellers of all classes, colors, and creeds to be restored and invigorated so that they might devote themselves to the benefit and welfare of others. And after the successful construction of Central Park, city after city in 19th century America sought to create public spaces, as Olmsted had wanted, accessible by foot, by carriage, and by horseback, to ensure that all people, of whatever means, could find pleasurable and healthful recreation. It's no wonder that in 1873, Senator Justin Morrill of Vermont, who had met Olmsted when he was in D.C. running the Sanitary Commission, asked Olmsted, now the most famous landscape architect in the country, to come to town to design the Capitol grounds. Designing the Capitol grounds offered the opportunity to make a statement. For Olmsted, the Capitol and its surrounding landscape should be a symbol for the new United States of America that had triumphed over deep divisions in the Civil War and freed itself from the institution of slavery. Olmsted spent 18 years overseeing the development of the Capitol grounds, focusing on ensuring easy and convenient access to the building, as well as creating a series of tiered terraces that anchored the building aesthetically to the landscape. I want to go back to this picture because when you go and look at the Capitol grounds the next time, think that it is Olmsted that did the terraces. Yes, we associate him with the landscape, but he also planted the building firmly through the terraces. Olmsted created paths that would invite citizens to experience the people's house without distraction or concern for safety. Visitors could enjoy a shady spot in the summer house, which we see here, or rest on seats offering views of the Capitol, framed by trees. The wonderful summer house was to include a water carillon, adding soft music to the cool oasis, regrettably something that was never realized. And in addition to the aesthetic, he ensured the more pedestrian underpinnings. He had engineers relay sewer, gas, and water lines beneath the surfaces. He plowed and tilled the soil, then added manure and at least 50 cubic feet of fuel peat to enrich the subsoil. Sadly, Olmsted's insistence on access to the grounds by all people is currently being threatened by proposed security measures. So we see here just a quick summary of the many and very diverse projects Olmsted undertook in the course of his career. Approximately 500 commissions, the Capitol grounds, Biltmore, college and institutional campuses, urban and suburban areas, planned communities. We often think of him as a park maker, but in fact, he and his firm was responsible for doing an amazing array of parks and landscapes around the country. Olmsted Senior effectively retired in 1897, but the firm bearing his name went on for another 100 years until about 1979. His 2 sons and 8 different successor firms carried on the work, with many other great landscape architects, like Charles Eliot, who was particularly active in Boston, and the son of the Harvard president, Charles Eliot. Also Warren Manning, Percival Gallagher, a man who was here often at the Cathedral grounds and whose name you will find on many of the records. Edward Clark Whiting, also someone who was here frequently at the Washington National Cathedral. James Frederick Dawson, and more. So let's now turn our attention to Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. When his father's beloved brother, John Hull, died of tuberculosis, his brother urged Olmsted Senior to take care of his widow. Now, Olmsted had had one unsuccessful engagement, and so as life had gone by, he had abandoned any hope for a passionate love life. So instead, he did what many in those days did. He married his brother's widow and became the father of her 3 children, John Charles Olmsted, Owen Olmsted, and Charlotte Olmsted, who dies, I should just say, in a sanitarium in 1908 after a long illness. It is into this family that Henry Perkins Olmsted was born in 1870. Yes, you heard that right, Henry Perkins Olmsted. It was not until he was 4 that his father decided to rename him Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. in a nearly manic desire to perpetuate his legacy. In later years, Olmsted dropped the junior so that one has to look very closely to figure out which of the Olmsteds is involved in many of the firm records. For more than half a century, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. plays a critical role in advancing his father's vision, forming the nation's state and national parks, creating the first academic program in landscape architecture at Harvard, inventing the field of urban planning, and serving as the youngest member of the Macmillan Commission, which created the city we know today. Always in the shadow of his great father, I nevertheless would submit to you that the Cathedral's Olmsted, Olmsted Jr., is an extraordinary talent and institution builder who merits great study and acclaim. In April 2022, as part of the bicentennial celebration, the Frederick Law Olmsted National Historic Site will convene a special conference looking at the Olmsted legacies. And Harvard has just announced that in October of 2022, it too will host a conference on the Olmsted legacy. Later this month, the very first biography of Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. will be published, and we hope that the bicentennial will continue to prompt further scholarship. Because Olmsted Senior had a very haphazard education and was largely an autodidact, it would be an understatement to say that he took his own children's education quite seriously, and none more than Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. Indeed, the first helicopter parent may have been Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. When Olmsted moves his office to Brookline, Massachusetts in the 1880s, Rick enrolls at Roxbury Latin, where he is a good student and athlete. Indeed, he's admitted to Harvard, where he ultimately graduates magna cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa. You would think that would be sufficient, but not so. The array of letters from senior to junior outlining the father's plans and intentions for his son is simply mind-boggling. Over a period of many years, Olmsted prescribes studies for his son, outlines areas for his improvement, and dictates his summer jobs. Mind you, pretty fantastic ones at Biltmore, the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, and Stanford University. By way of example, shortly before Rick starts his freshman year at Harvard, Senior makes it clear that he should become an expert in plants, something that Olmsted always considered a deficiency in his own training. So he exhorts Rick to spend at least 5 hours a week in extracurricular reading and thinking about landscape architecture. If you do so, writes father to son, I reckon that in 4 years you would thus have read everything not ephemeral in English, French, and German, and would be the best read man as to this art in the world. At the same time, he calls on Rick to keep track of all things going on in the office. I want you to be prepared to be a leader of the van, he writes. How much abler should I have been had I your education? As years pass, Olmsted becomes ever more focused on the role that Rick must play in carrying on his reputation. He writes a letter to him in the third person. How is Rick to be best prepared to take advantage of what in reputation I have been earning? Reputation coming as the result of what I shall have done, but not coming in my time. How best prepared to carry on the war against ignorance and prejudice and meanness? How best to make landscape architecture respected as an art and a liberal profession? Again, Olmsted has some very firm ideas about how to be prepared, and he writes about them in no uncertain terms to Rick. In September 1890, as Rick begins at Harvard, he receives this from his father: seek the best society, seek to make yourself desirable in it, make yourself well-informed on matters of conversation. You have disappointed me in not training yourself more to acquire social grace. It is entirely a matter of will. You have your defects and your weaknesses, but on the whole, you are in a capital condition at the starting point of the university period of your life work. Now, I don't know about you, but about this time, I think I would have called for a therapist. Rick does not do that, but in true junior style, he rebels. In 1894, as he nears graduation, he writes to his father that he cannot learn plants and that he thinks he should turn his attention to zoology instead. His father writes to him, if you are weak in what you have led me to believe that you would consider yourself weak, with reference to our profession, such weakness would, in my judgment, be much more destructive to your success as a zoologist. Of course, we know who wins this argument, and we here at the Cathedral can be thankful for it. The sons of great men are often not great men, but as Tony Jarvis, the late headmaster of Roxbury Latin, writes, occasionally the son becomes his father's worthy successor. This is surely true of Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. Far from rejecting his father, Jr. embraces him and his work. In 1897, he becomes a partner in the firm, and over the next 50 years, he truly professionalizes the field of landscape architecture. Now, while we think of him as a landscape architect, I want to note that he was a significant conservationist as well. In 1916, almost 50 years after his father drafted a plan for Yosemite, Jr. helps establish a new bureau to manage the parks and monuments across the country. He crystallizes the national park idea by drafting a mission statement that is the core of the National Park Service Organic Act. This simple yet eloquent statement still guides conservation today. In addition, he and the firm do master plans, roadways, and circulation for national parks, even 2 reports that address invasive plants in the Great Smoky Mountains and Hawaii National Parks. And in what I believe is visionary work, Rick begins to advance sustainable xeriscaping for landscape architecture in the West. Of course, when it comes to Junior, we know him and love him because of his involvement with the Close. And so for the next few minutes, I want to look at some of the many wonderful records that exist regarding Junior's service as the first landscape architect at the Cathedral from 1907 to 1928. I went to olmstedonline.org, and I urge you to do the same. It's a marvelous one-stop shop resource to see what records are available. There you can find Library of Congress letters, as well as materials at the Olmsted Archives in Brookline, including photo albums. This summary page at Olmsted Online shows that the Olmsted brothers undertook a total of 328 plans during their service to the cathedral. Letters in 1907 mark the earliest correspondence. Here we can barely see Bishop Satterley asking Rick to come to the Close. By April, the firm is charged with doing a grading plan, but Rick notes still no discussion of terms. A few months later, we see that Dean Bratnell is starting to write regular letters. Here we learn that the convention is coming, and while the chapter has no money to pay Olmsted, it has charged Dean Bratnell with, and I quote, sowing as much grass seed as possible in order that the crude effort of the present surrounding may be done away with. By 1908, the first formal Olmsted plan showing the cathedral appears, identifying the building on the ridge with vistas to the Capitol. And I like to make the contrast. When Olmsted Senior was working at the U.S. Capitol, there was a building there. When Junior comes here, he has to imagine the Capitol and help position it. You will find also in these documents far more mundane matters. Here, too, requests from the dean and the bishop about where to place massive amounts of earth that are being dug up for the building. Here you can see 2 telegrams, again, providing advice as to where the dirt should be laid. For those of you who love sleuthing, here's just a sampling of the remarkable photos that can be found in the Olmsted brothers' photo albums, and I dare say in Nancy Fetterman's hot little hands as well. When the Frederick Law Olmsted National Historic Site was handed over to the National Park Service, there were more than 1 million records in the house, an organizational legacy of Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., and they are still being scanned today. So here are just a few photos showing the cathedral, the newly constructed walls, the hill where the bishop's garden wall is to be constructed, an old garage near the bishop's house, the so-called Jefferson tree boxes, a slide from Mrs. Bratnell showing boxwood, more photos of the Close, a lovely drawing of the stonework, another plan of the Close, this time showing an underground toilet near the proposed amphitheater, something I found very interesting. And here are some lovely drawings of what they call the Bishop Garden Arbor and the Rose Garden. Of course, we know that Mrs. Bratnell takes the reins in 1928, so I found the records in the late 20s quite interesting. Here is Mr. Whiting recounting his visit, and it appears the relationship is not what it used to be. They all felt that the turf panel was too long in Mr. Olmsted's scheme, that it brought the sundial too near the large yew tree. Also, they were very anxious to eliminate the wall seat around the sundial. I must confess, writes Whiting, that I like the shorter, fatter panel that they came up with, better than the long one shown in our drawing, though I tried hard to find out why Mr. Olmsted had been so anxious to push the sundial where it was. Mrs. Bratnell, he goes on to write, thinks it would be a waste of money to put in such expensive peonies. And then I love this. As far as the general enrichment plan, nobody seems to like the idea of making the planting along the parapet wall, and nobody was very enthusiastic about filling in the gaps. It does indeed appear the relationship is deteriorating. And here is a delightful story involving correspondence between George Gray Barnard and Mrs. Bracknell, excusing Mr. Olmsted's concern about the antique baptismal font. Apparently, he was very concerned that it would be hurt by being outside and had encouraged something else. However, it is clear that Mrs. Bracknell wants the font, and Mrs. Bracknell will get it. We know that the Close is the product of many diverse talents, but I submit it as Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., to whom we owe the singular vision that helped locate and frame the cathedral on Mount St. Alban. In a talk to All Hallows Guild in 1915, he outlined his vision, and it's worth repeating here. Seen from the city, the cathedral will crown a densely wooded hill, standing tree-embowered at the summit of easy and graceful slopes. The right approach is the one which shall impress the mind with the grandeur of the building, a sentiment similar to the one that his father had when framing the U.S. Capitol. As one stands at the Peace Cross, the sweep of the horizon from east to west must be preserved in its entirety. Regrettably, a vista that is not entirely preserved today, but that was intended to draw the religious and the secular together. The great charm, and this is a quote we all know, the great charm of approaching the cathedral through and up a wooded hillside must be taken advantage of to the fullest extent. Much as we began, we will finish with Junior's appeal, like his father's, to all of us. Continued loving and thoughtful care for many years alone can develop perfection. Once open space is gone, it is gone forever. Whether we are here on the Close, threatened by a skating rink, or in Jackson Park, in Riverside, or Essex Park, New Jersey. We can never take these wonderful spaces for granted. Beauty and stability in the landscape from attention, care, and patience, and vigilance against those who would fill them with buildings and structures and programs. So let me thank all of you. And let me invite you to join us in the celebration of Olmsted 200 from now until the end of 2022. Here is the group of national partners around the country who are helping us put this celebration together, and not to mention the remarkable Olmsted network of which All Hallows Guild is a part. Here is our national website, olmsted200.org. I urge you to visit it, where you will find a national calendar filled each and every day with new opportunities, virtual and real, tours, visits, conferences, lectures around the country. Here is our Olmsted Insider newsletter, which will provide you an up-to-date report every month on the bicentennial. And here is our student essay competition. If you have children or grandchildren, the time is now for them to write an essay tying Olmsted to today's challenges. The deadline is January 15. And here is also something that we look forward to showcasing around the country, carillon concerts inspired by Olmsted. Our celebration began in the early parts of the pandemic, and we determined that we wanted to do something that could happen regardless of the state of COVID-19. And so we commissioned carillonneurs around the country to write pieces for the carillon, which will be played during the celebration year. And we're very grateful to Ed Nasser, who is the chief judge of this effort, and will be announcing the winners in January 2022. Here also is an exhibit which we are making available to venues across the country free. It is online and you can enjoy it there, but you can also download it and make a physical exhibit. I have several sample panels in the back of the room. And here's something to put on your calendar now. The eve of his birthday, April 25, 2022, we'll be having a gala event in the Loeb Boathouse in Central Park. The special genius of the Olmsteds and their firm has proved to be a priceless resource for so many of us. The Olmsted Parks and Places are a critical part of our heritage, and essential to our physical and social well-being and the public good. Now more than ever, it's up to us to ensure that these great spaces are preserved, protected, and maintained for future generations. Again, thank you to all of you in All Hallows Guild for the great work that you do on behalf of this beautiful space. Thank you so much. Sure. So you've been rendered speechless, but we'll still take a few questions.
If anyone has any questions, don't be shy. It's a great opportunity. Yes, Sandy.
I believe it has been, I don't know.
I don't know the answer to that question. We will look into it and let you know.
I can probably give you the PowerPoint, and you could put it on the website or just make it available in a link. So,
Questions?
oh gosh, ooh, that's a toughie. Well, this is a story I love, and some of you may know it. As we could see, it was a very interesting relationship between father and son, and ultimately a very positive one. I think one of the more moving stories is work on Biltmore. That's when Olmsted really started to show senility. He was repeating himself. He was writing the same letter over and over again. And so Junior was responsible really for sort of slowly moving him out of Biltmore and doing it in a gracious way. At that time, his portrait was being painted by John Singer Sargent, and he was not able to complete the painting. And so Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. agreed to don the clothes that his father had been wearing for the portrait so that John Singer Sargent could complete it. I just think that's so utterly and totally moving. And it's also, I think, interesting to know that they tried to keep Senior at home, but ultimately he was getting a little violent, and they did put him into the McLean Asylum in Massachusetts. And Junior was actually there at 2 a.m. on the night of his death. Junior had gone fairly regularly to visit him there. And this was a landscape that Olmsted had also designed. And I think it's very funny. Apparently he was still somewhat lucid, because when he went to the asylum, he looked at it, he said, "Darn, they didn't follow my plans." So
Helen.
Actually, that's a good question. Where is son? I know father is buried in Hartford. He died, and there was a service in Boston, and then he was moved to the cemetery in Hartford. And one of the projects we're working on is trying to beautify that space. It's not particularly attractive. Where is Junior buried? I'm going to have to figure that out. There are 12 volumes of writings by Olmsted that have been published, thousands and thousands of pages, and then thousands and thousands of pieces of correspondence at the Library of Congress. So he was a prolific writer and thinker. And he obviously was quite moved by his work in the South. And it's interesting to watch his evolution. There were the radical abolitionists at that time, and he was not one of them. He started out as a gradualist. He really did not feel that immediate emancipation would work. And as he spent more time and as he thought more about his experiences, especially the recurrent violence that he saw in the South and what he perceived to be a total lack of civilization on the part of white plantation owners, as he thought more and more about it, he became much more radical. And at a certain point, he was actually providing weapons as the danger of slavery expanding westward was occurring. He was actually helping to arm those who were opposed to the expansion of slavery. And so this was something that he cared deeply about. And at one point, he actually wanted to work with contraband slaves who had been freed to try to help them find a place in society. He did not end up getting that particular job, but he was just very interested in trying to figure out how to incorporate African Americans fully into the American system. So I think these kinds of thoughts permeated all the work that he did. And one of the most turgid things that he tried to write was something called, he was really trying to understand civilization. And while this is probably, I'm sure, not politically correct today, as he was looking at his landscapes, he viewed these as a way of helping to civilize all of us, to make us feel nicer towards one another, the communitiveness notion, to have us feel nice and civil so that we could come together as a country. So I think that these social values were part and parcel of his work throughout his career. And I think if there's any fault that can be made of Junior, I mean, Junior really comes in and he just professionalizes that office and he makes it a thriving, working profession. I think he is informed by and agrees with his father's views, and I think articulates them and pursues them. But there was a little more social passion, I think, in Olmsted Senior than was in Junior. Carol. The question is, in light of recent events, do I feel optimistic that Olmsted landscapes are not at risk? And my answer is, one reason that we have Olmsted 200 is to really emphasize that this is an ongoing exercise and responsibility. I think one can never take historic natural spaces for granted. And even though we have seen more public appreciation for parks and landscapes over the last 18 months than probably ever before, we have not seen in city after city budgets going up to accommodate that need. And so I think it's going to be a continuing challenge. And I showed you just a few pictures here. I mean, recently, a vast part of Jackson Park was clear-cut for the Obama Presidential Center. In Riverside, they are currently threatening a great flood wall that would destroy the vision of the Des Plaines River. I mentioned Essex County Park System in New Jersey. They have a zoo there. They want to expand the zoo and the hardscape. In each and every instance, these are likable projects. No one is opposed to the Obama Presidential Center. No one is opposed to a vibrant zoo. No one is opposed to dealing with flooding. But what happens invariably is that a good sounding building, a good sounding project is brought forth. And unless there are those who understand the value of open space, who understand the value of green restorative landscapes, which is what Olmsted understood better than anyone, we will see these places fritter away, and we will not have the beautiful restorative landscapes that we need. And so I think this is, again, a place where All Hallows Guild has historically been so strong and so forceful that there is value inherent in landscape in and of itself, and that it does not need to be programmed. It does not need more buildings, even though there are many immense and competing interests. So I think that's going to continue to be our challenge as we're faced with competing valuable interests. How can we find a way to address those while not losing our open space?
Dee?
The question is, what is going on in Jackson Park in light of the construction of the Obama Presidential Center? Let me just tell you what the National Association for Olmsted Parks, which is my organization, which is overseeing the bicentennial, has said. Back in 2015, we went on record as raising concern about the appropriation of public parkland for a private purpose. The foundation is a private entity, and it was given for 99 years a vast part of the public Jackson Park land for purposes of the foundation. We were concerned that this was a precedent that we did not want to see set, and regrettably it was. What we said all along is that there were other places in the area where one could build a very vibrant, wonderful presidential center that would not intrude in the integrity of Jackson Park. One of the critical components of Jackson Park for Olmsted was to have open vistas to the lakefront. When he went to Chicago, quite frankly, he thought it was pretty bleak and an unhappy place. And what he viewed as the one redeeming factor was this gorgeous lakeside sublime. It was almost like Yosemite, and so that was what he wanted protected. There were places where we could have had a presidential center that would have allowed those vistas to remain. Alas, that is not going to be the case. And so I think it will be incumbent on those who continue to be interested to try to be vigilant and to see what can be done. I mean, we essentially believed that the mitigation steps that were offered were not sufficient, and that essentially a very significant piece of Jackson Park will be lost forever. And while it may be possible that you can have a plaque or you can have a sign that says this is what was here, you will no longer have what Olmsted envisioned.
There's a question in the back.
A good question about the relationship between Florence Brown Brotnell and Mr. Olmsted. And I must confess, I'm not an expert, and I would want to go through and read through thousands of pages to really get a better sense of what their relationship was. I do know that early on in the relationship, when he came on board as the landscape architect, she was quite willing to ask for advice. I think she asked him on how to do terracing and had various other questions. And so my sense is that she really utilized him and the Olmsted firm as a bit of an education for herself. And as I said earlier, Junior obviously was the name when it comes to the Olmsted firm on this project. But Percival Gallagher was here a lot, Edward Clark Whiting was here a lot, and I dare say, I mean, Junior was working on a lot of things. He was much in demand. This was the individual in the firm that so many of the clients wanted to see. So I suspect he wasn't here all the time, and in fact, he had his subordinates here. But I do think that he learned, that she learned, and that they worked together. It's obvious that there is a vast array of communication going on between her husband at the very least, and then ultimately between her and the firm. And I think Florence Brown Bottineau, from my experience with the Guild, this was not a shrinking violet. She, frankly, had a pretty strong and confident sense of herself, as rightly she should have. And I think that working with the Olmsted firm over a period of years and seeing how they design their masses of plants, not lots of little dribs and drabs, but masses and shapes and forms, I think she learned from that. And then she then articulated it herself as the landscape architect for the cathedral. When you think about it, there were not a lot of women that were working at that time. I mean, certainly Beatrix Jones-Farrand, we know, was a very accomplished woman landscape architect. She also engaged periodically with the Olmsted firm. I'm hoping somebody will do some research on that, because I've heard two different views, that they dismissed her and that they did not dismiss her. There is a blog that is on the Olmsted 200 website to which I draw your attention, and it talks about the Olmsteds and did they have women in their firm. They did not. They had one secretary who I'm sure did all the work and basically kept them all organized, but they did not have any female landscape architects. However, there is a story with Senior where the father and daughter had been working on a project, and I believe it was in Connecticut, and the father died, and Senior recommended that the daughter be continued as the responsible landscape architect on the project, and it did happen. So that's an area of, I think, considerable interest, and we'll hope to see lots more scholarship on that.
I think if there's one more.
Mm-hmm. Yes, how do we bring the next generation in, and how do we build support for these Olmsted parks and places? I think that's really a critical question going forward, and it's interesting. In Chicago, there were really no friends groups, conservancy groups along the lines of those, say, at the Emerald Necklace or in Atlanta. The Chicago park system is a little bit different, and I think had there been some vigorous, strong groups on the ground, that might have helped this issue. I mean, it's interesting because we are finding that there are many communities that do not feel welcome in Olmsted Parks or in other parks. And so this is something that I think has been raised in the context of the racial social reckoning that we have all been in the midst of over the last 18 months. So it's forced us within the Olmsted community to really think about that. I mean, are our parks open and welcoming? Does everyone have equitable access? And I think the answer is no. The Trust for Public Land has certainly pointed out that there are many communities where it is very hard for everyone to access a public park. So this has prompted us to really start to think, what can we do better to ensure that people feel comfortable, that there is access, that there is empowerment within the community, so that the community owns the space and helps develop the plans for that space, something that has not always occurred. So I think those are all areas of potential progress and development as we go forward. And we've also opted to go via social media, something that we really have not done before at the National Association for Olmsted Parks. We have an Instagram account, we have a Twitter account. We're really trying to reach the younger generation where they are. And I know you all have had just a fantastic social media for quite some time. And I think that, again, is another way of messaging to individuals who may not know and understand about the Olmsted legacy. Yeah, I think that's right, and it gets back to the other question. I mean, Olmsted really believed that parks were critical infrastructure. They were not luxuries. And I think that there is a tendency, and this is certainly the case in many budgets, whether it's private budgets or public budgets, that the landscaping is always at the bottom of the list, that it's always the last thing that you do, that it is a luxury somehow and doesn't need to be budgeted. And I think that, again, is a mentality that all of us can help to try to change, because as Olmsted realized, if you have thoughtful design, if you have vibrant, healthy landscapes, not only does it help you breathe and help you in terms of your health, but it makes you relax and it is restorative, and presumably then makes you help reach out in a more wonderful way to others, that notion of communicativeness. So I think you're absolutely right.
I think Ms. Petri will be here after we conclude the official part of the meeting if people have more questions. But in the meantime, if we can show our appreciation. Thank you.
That was fantastic. I've been impressed by the international impact of the gardens and grounds here. I don't know if Olmsted thought about that, but due to the fact so many embassies are here in Washington, we have international visitors frequently. With the environmental meetings happening in the world today, what impact? I wonder if he ever envisioned the impact his policies would have on the world. We're all linked environmentally in ways we never realized, but the world is becoming quite aware of how important these things can be. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the impact of the Guild's work really on the international community. You have the World Bank, the IMF, the embassies, other visitors internationally who come here and take away, I'm sure, some of his philosophy that's evident in the designs. So it's an important aspect. I wanted also to thank you for mentioning diversity, equity, and inclusion. The Guild, for the first time this past year, did open up discussions on that matter and had a guest speaker, and we will intend to continue that effort and increase our awareness of the need to be sensitive to those matters as well. I had one final thing. I'm seeing Nancy Fetterman sitting over there. And Nancy is, among other things, the archivist of the Guild and has a phenomenal talent when it comes to keeping our Guild, our records organized and in a way that's reachable. And if you ever have a question about the history, she is the expert. She also, this year, spent an inordinate number of hours moving our offices, getting them restructured, getting all the records sorted through, repacked down, and organized. So if Nancy, would you come up here for a minute? So we want a little acknowledgement of your efforts and people to know who you are. On behalf of the Guild, we have just a little token of our esteem and gratitude for all you have done and are doing, and how important it is to keep the records going. Do you have anything to say? Thank you. Thank you. I think Nancy falls in the unsung heroes category. Now, we will have a service at noon today in this same location. Reverend Jan Cope will lead the All Hallows Guild honorary service. It's All Saints Day. As many of you know, it's traditional to observe, and we are linked. The All Hallows name and the All Saints is a link. So Jan, you're most welcome, please, to adjourn for a bit and come back to this location at noon for the start of that service. Does someone have any other matter they would like to bring up? Well, you're fantastically patient. Thank you all. I hope there's still some refreshments in the back. Go back and have your second go round, and we'll meet up again here at noon for Jan Cope's presentation. Thank you so much.